There you go. Oh, wonderful. Oh, I didn't know you guys could just record on your own, actually. That was pretty cool. I don't
Yeah.
know. Evan just started recording his own thing. So you guys can do that too, actually, if you want. Um, so so it's one of the reasons Varanasi is actually so important. And there's a beautiful book if you're interested in Varanasi, and it tells you all about all the gods and ghats and temples in Varanasi. And it's called like the Light on Banaras or something like this. Banaras is another name for Varanasi. It has many. But in the old days, it was a place of tithras, and tithras are watering. It's spring waters come up, and of course the Shiva Linga is very much connected to spring waters. I think in the old days they would just put the Shiva Lingas where there was spring, and then it would come up, and you see how the yoni is shaped. It would come up through the stone, bubble up from the ground, and then follow the yoni down, and they could just fill their jug. And for celebrations, they would just literally make a lassi, like a curd drink, by pouring all the honey and nuts and cream and all on the lingam, and then it's all pouring down, and you can take and collect that and drink it for the celebration. Um, and so yeah, that Shiva Linga and that spring water and that sort of connection of the masculine and feminine energies to bring the life and it's like the water is the moon, but that essence that brings life in the water is kind of the sun, right? And that's what the sun energy is, the one that's bringing the life, the essence, and the moon is the thing itself. It's there, it's water, it's I can drink it.
Like the sun boils the water and brings an end to the stagnation that the water just sitting there would bring. And that's why like the feminine needs the masculine to create that change and that movement in a way.
Exactly, yeah. It's like this reflection from each other. And we think of the moon, or we think of the the material as fairly inert, you could say, but well, for something to come into existence, we generally think, okay, the spirit just kind of comes down from heavens and comes into this body and gives it energy. But there's also this kind of yearning, this longing, this moony energy that the earth has, and it's longing for that spirit. And so there's kind of this, it's like lightning. They come up and they sort of meet each other, actually. It's not just one energy coming down and penetrating the other. There's a meeting between them. Um, and so on the writing, like when I wrote about the moon, I wrote a lot about the Ayurveda and the elements, because well, the moon, I think that one of the more important things for us is it's that culture that surrounds us. Um, because that's really where, well, really what your moon and your astrology charts, that's what it represents, really, is all that culture you've absorbed from your mother and your family and your place of being. And so you'll find that's your comfort zone. If you're not in that sort of culture, you're kind of longing for it somehow. Um, and so I kind of grew up traveling and wandering quite a bit. And so that I've got Migration, for example, for my moon. And so that traveling and wandering is just, that's the only culture I know where people from way back, for some of these schools I attended when I was young, or jobs I worked at when I'm young, they go, oh, wow, that's incredible. I don't know anybody that travels like you do, Mike. And I'm like, oh, well, that's all I know is people who travel like I do. I don't know I don't know any settlers, actually. They're very exciting to meet settlers, actually. People, they got the middle class home and the kids. I'm like, oh, it's going to be so fun. I'll get you out some animal crackers or something. Some
What did you say your moon was in, Mike? I'm sorry.
It's in Migration. It's a deer, it's an antelope, it's 5. Emmett's also going to be joining the Nakshatra groups, Dana. And so, yeah, I think all of you are in all of them. So anyway, um, so yeah, that's the 5th Nakshatra. But anyway, so that it's that culture that we're comfortable in and that culture that's around us. And so really, I think the moon energy, to get to know that, we want to get to actually know nature. It's not so much just sort of sitting in nature, but it's like actually getting to know it. The best way to get to know nature and connect with nature is through Ayurveda. That's really what this system, and I think the way it connects through Jyotish astrology as well. I really think that's the whole purpose of it. It's like to help us to understand nature. And so the more we can understand nature, it's like the classics will say, like, get to know, don't be frightened of the Devi. Get to know the Devi, accept what she gives through. It's like when nature punishes you, it is kind of giving you a message a lot of times. It's kind of saying like you're acting somehow not in accord with nature. And so the moon energy is sort of where we want to try to act in accord of nature as closely as possible. And so we try to, right, we plant our crops in the spring instead of in the fall, because if we plant them in the fall, nature's not going to support our activities. And so the more we kind of match our activities to nature, what the cycles of nature are doing, the more likely our activities are going to sort of bear fruit. And so,
does this matter? Can I interrupt like this, or what's the best way?
yeah, once in a while, go ahead. Yeah, of course, it's, I'm sure everyone probably has some questions.
Okay. Yeah. So when we're looking at the moon and connecting with nature, and I guess that would depend how we connect will be dependent on what our moon sign would be. So like in my case, what you're saying is resonating a lot with me because I have a moon in Dhanishta. So that's all about getting the rhythm of nature, right? So I just want to see if that resonates as strongly with other people or how general that is, I guess.
There are, yeah, there are different moon signs that are going to resonate in different ways and connect in different ways to nature. And so, yeah, that will definitely, there is anyways, I generally find like the people who I'm friends with and the people who I get close with, Mrigashirsa is a very free sort of moon. And so there's usually a resonance with the people who kind of, whatever, who I associate with or become close with. There's often with their moon positions, there's a certain amount of freedom. And so we see that in some different, like Swati, a lot of Ketu, nakshatras are quite free, and a lot of sun nakshatras are quite free as well. And then some nakshatras are much more aligned, like, it's like I met this girl here the other day, and she was telling me she does coaching, and she studied coaching through, like, I don't know, it's the biggest guru for like Oprah Winfrey's coach. And so it's like, well, some people are going to resonate with Oprah Winfrey's coach, and some people are going to resonate with me. There's going to be quite unlikely, actually, that there's going to be much blend between those, because she probably wouldn't like my classes, my teaching. She'd be like, oh, I don't like the way he does things. Nobody knows who he is. There's only 5 people there. He can't be any sort of authority. And so she'd go away, right? She wants like always accepted by a million people. And okay, no, there's my guru. Or there's what there's what she resonates, right? And so, yeah, there is definitely there's a lot to be said for, say, resonance and harmony with the moon, both the moon period. And now there's a sort of sensitivity. And this, I think that's still an important topic to talk about, I think, in tantra or mystical circles, because there's a certain sensitivity of the moon that we're trying to get. And now, in a way, the sensitivity of our moon is kind of our ability to taste all the different flavors of life. And of course, in our individual lives, there's going to be certain flavors that we like. And when I say flavors, I quite like some people are quite attuned to bitter experiences in life. And so that's what they find, and that's what they kind of resonate with. And they're kind of drawn to that, sort of looking for that bitter experience for life. And that's also dependent on the period of life you're in as well, right? Sometimes you're just bitter. That's what you're looking for. Sometimes you're looking for like the more fire, that hot and spice, right? But the moon is our ability to taste all of that. I find in astrology, in some charts, especially like you get the darker moons in an astrology chart, especially if there's a little bit of a Saturn on that, they can't taste anything in life. It doesn't matter. Sometimes you get people, they're very successful, they're living these rich lives and right, beautiful women around and beautiful luxuries all around them. they can't taste any of it. It doesn't mean anything to them. There's no flavor to it for them. Whereas like a little village boy like me went into their life, I would almost be overwhelmed, right? With flavor. It would be so much sensation and so much. And again, it's that, in a way, the moon is that psychic sensitivity, that intuitive sensitivity, that feeling, that being able to absorb everything around you. Now, at the same time, that's going to be half of any clients that any of us get. That's going to be their problem, actually, is they're too sensitive and they're absorbing all of that. And the remedy for that is that stronger moon, right? Where they're seated in themselves and they're strong and they know who they are, right? And this might mean like we can harness the energies of any of the planets, not just the sun, even to have a good, like, part of our self-knowledge is that mercurial knowledge. We have a good story of ourselves. We know where we came from, and we kind of know that path. We can see where we came from. I'll go into those more in Mercury, but where we came from, it's like, okay, you can say, well, where I come from in this life, that's one of our self-narrative. You can expand that into the lineage, into the sun, into the moon, into that ancestral heritage. Where do I come from? Try to see the self and help a client see themselves within those bigger cycles. And so that's going to be the support for that sensitivity so that you can absorb. It's like sometimes you give someone criticism and it hurts them too much. But if they're very strong and they know who they are, they know where they come from, you give them criticism and they'll go, okay, I have to think about that. Right. And they will, especially if they keep getting the same criticism over and over. But they're able to handle that criticism of life. They're able to handle that. And so you'll get that in a lot of other areas. The moon is itself is that sensitivity. And so it's like once you have the strong sun, once you're sort of firmly seated, then you start to develop that sensitivity. Then you start to work on that sensitivity. Now, on the other hand, it's like there's sort of two schools of thought of what we're trying to do with the moon. Are we trying to make ourselves very calm and shanty and peaceful so that there's just this, like, you could say, a perfect mirror on the lake, right? Are we trying to do that? On one hand, we are. That's a big part of it. So that nice and calm and smooth, and then you can feel everything. But I think about this a lot. That's kind of like, okay, that's maybe an ideal, but we look at the whole myth of the churning of the ocean of milk, and that's churning. And a lot of the tantra gurus would say, okay, well, go into that calm, peaceful, relaxed state, and then go into the stress, and then go back to the calm and go back to the stress. I actually think someone like Wim Hof. Wim Hof, this is this ice bath, this Iceman guy, right? You do these ice baths, and that's basically what he's doing, right? You get into your meditative state, you get your calm, steady, smooth, easy breath, and then you plunge yourself into this ice cold, freezing water that just shocks the whole system with stress. But the whole point is you've got this breathing practice, and so you're able to maintain the calm and the stress, right? So you're basically, I think he's really good, probably really good practice for people who have traumas, you could say, in a way, because it gets them away from their traumas, but they experience this trauma, but learn how to sort of control themselves in it. Now, of course, you don't just plunge into the ice water on the first day because you freak out and maybe you don't want to ever do it again, especially someone who's sensitive to trauma, right? You want to build up that strength through the breathing practices, through the pranayama. Pranayama is kind of building sun and moon factions. It's kind of working that whole sort of system. And then you take the stress, and then you come out, and you take the stress. And so we do that in life. I find that's been a big part of my life. I go off to the jungles where there's nothing and just peaceful. And I'm at these little ashrams and I've got just the most perfect practice in the world. Of the most, like, life is just perfect. There can't be anything. And then I leave that and I come into the West and travel where things are going to be a bit more difficult for me, where there's going to be a bit of struggle. I try to meet with people more and right and teach and kind of get out. And so there's always going to be this, like, anyways, the stress, just try to stress the whole sort of system, but maintain that calm in the stress, like the perfect sort of Zen ninja master. He's fighting, but he's just kind of like, right? It's like time almost. I just saw this in astrology. What was that combination? Anyways, the combination, I could swear to God, time actually says slow down for these people. It's like some of the fastest people in the world, sort of thing. Whether it's yoga or martial arts or even some of the Olympic things. And it was like there's a whole group of people, and it was almost like time seems to slow down for them just that little bit. And so they can act really, of course, split second sort of thing. So, and we can do that through our breathing practices, actually slow time down. I don't know if I've talked about this, but that's like, I used to do this, no, I do just kind of common practices, but once in a while I would do this, like I would have, 3 months or 6 months to just like dive into a practice. And so I was doing this anuloma viloma, this alternate nostril breathing. And when you slowly like add a second to the ratio, I think I put the ratio in the writing somewhere. And so when you slowly add the second to the ratio and it start expanding this breath, and it's like, it gets up to taking several minutes just to take one breath. And so then you take 10 breaths and an hour has gone by or something like that. And well, you can't believe it because you've only taken 10 breaths. It actually feels like no time at all has gone by. And so it's this experience of time that's very, very slow. Now I'm going to talk about time much more on the Mars period. I haven't sent that out, but I'm going to talk about the time, different cycles in the Mars, because it has more to do with circadian rhythms. The moon is these steady, fairly even cycles, you could say in a way, right? We get spring, summer, fall, and then it's this sort of relationship with the other things and um, it's these relationships with other things, especially the Mars, that sort of determines the more circadian rhythms. So it's like, it's even these charts it'll say, okay, well, I'll do your meditation between 4 and 6 a.m. sort of thing. Well, that also depends where you are and what season it is and a lot of these things. And he'd say, well, or it gets tied to say the time of sunrise. And so you want to do your meditations just before sunrise. And then at sunrise, basically, then you start to your asana practice and you go from there. And so, and part of the moon energy, of course, I mentioned, is getting into those rhythms and getting into those steady things. Another thing with moon, now I want to get into the Ayurveda here right away, but another thing with the moon, just generally speaking, is say on full moons is when we're most sensitive to our environment. We're most sensitive to pick things up that are around us. And so even with our students and our clients, when it comes to timing, it can be very important, say like, okay, if you're going to clean your room, okay, you're only going to do it once a month, say you're going to clean your house once a month, do it, say, just before on the full moon. So that day on the full moon, when you're sitting there, you're at least absorbing this sort of clean energy, right? You're absorbing something that's sort of healthy somehow. And so then we might also want to say, like on the full moons, and that's of course, like you go online and like, especially the women are all over the full moon celebrations. But what you're trying to do is situate yourself in this environment, this culture of healthy spiritual growth. And so that you're absorbing that nice, healthy energy, especially on the day of the full moon, right? And that sort of clean energy on the day of the full moon. The reason tantric practices get done on the dark moon, and now there's a difference between the dark moon and the new moon, right? There's a day difference between those. And so you're doing the tantric practices on the dark moon because you're least sensitive. And so, and that way you're not gonna absorb as much of that negative energy that sort of goes into the dark moons. Now, the other thing about the dark moon is you're less sensitive, and people with the dark moon in their chart, they can be emotional, a little bit emotionally cruel. And that's what we sort of see come out on the dark moons. There's this kind of nature is a bit more cruel. It's not sensitive. It's not soft. And so we're kind of capable ourselves of doing more cruel things on the dark moon. And so then you find these tantric practices to sort of try to get out that a little bit more of that dark energy, right? Because it's going to be there naturally, but you try to get that energy out, say in a in a healthy way, right? By worshiping Kali, by worshiping and giving prayers to these sort of dark, shadowy energies in ourselves. Um, Again, so if you're doing shadow work or any kind of wanting to go into that sort of, it's like our own dark side is more likely to come out on that dark moon. And then so you get that out on the dark moon, and then the next day is like the dawning of the new day. So the new moon, then they say that's when you start something new. That's when you go ahead.
How can you tell if, because I'm born on a new moon, so how can you tell it's a dark moon versus the new moon?
By the degree of the moon. And so if it's by degree, if it's behind the sun, still going towards the sun, then it's sorry, it's dark moon then. Once it's past the sun, it becomes the new moon in
Okay.
in the chart. And
Thank you.
so yeah. And so there's a lot of confusion in that, even when you go online and you're trying to kind of figure out what to do on dark moon and new moon days. It's really gets confusing to sort those 2 days out. And so we'll talk about that. Let me know if you have any more questions on that topic, because it does get a lot of confusion. I'm going to bring up some of the Ayurveda notes here.
Did you send the notes for the moon? I don't have them, I believe.
Okay, I'll make sure I send it all with the thing. I think I did send it in the email. I sent at least 3 attachments to you in it. So
Yeah, I got the City of Eight, the Ascendant, and the Sun.
okay, I'll attach them then. So I didn't make very many big changes to the moon section. I sent it out to everybody else, and I have been changing it a little bit on the way. But in the moon section, we can kind of like, okay, this is ways for us to kind of understand energy. And so we can understand whether things are kind of nourishing or reducing. And Chinese medicine sort of uses this a lot as well. And so it's whether you want to sort of tonify an energy or whether you want to sedate an energy, is how we kind of talk about take energy out of the system. And now, I don't think I've talked about this. I haven't talked about like sort of what I call sadomasochist relationships. Everybody's giving me a blank stare, so I don't think so. And so this is basically when things go out, when a relationship is out of balance, you could say, right? When it goes to that extreme. And so I learned these sort of in regards to health and healing in a sense, because there's often, let's say, an organ system that starts to work quite strongly. And what it's doing, it's sort of compensating for other organ systems that are working a little bit weak, and they're not sort of, and so you get these in the relationships. Somehow you get these kind of strong imbalances. And of course, once it goes out of imbalance, then it slowly starts to spread and spiral kind of out of control. And so when it comes to healing and helping and these sorts of things, ideally we'll want to catch these imbalances right when they go out of control, and that's the easiest to do something about it. But when they sort of get out of control in a bigger way, oftentimes it becomes a sort of we have to fix the whole culture around them in a way. Have to sort of, they have to heal their whole lifestyle, right? When it really spins out of control and gets bad. But then what happens is in our sort of system of healing, and I'll talk more about this, and if I don't, someone please remind me, these sort of sadomasochist sort of idea of the relationships. But the theory behind that is the masochist is doing a lot of work and not really getting a lot of positive feedback, right? That they don't feel like they're actually achieving anything. They're just working, right? And so the organ systems kind of get like that as well, and our relationships out there. And the saddest is kind of weak. It's not doing anything. kind of manipulating the other organs or the other people around it or the other person in the relationship with you. And it's kind of manipulating that. And that's actually because of weakness, right? It looks like it's the strong, and we often make a mistake when we look at that, because we often blame everything on, say, the masochist or the sadist sort of person, the person who's manipulating everything. We go, oh, look at that person, they're manipulating everything and they're not doing anything for themselves. This isn't necessarily always, this is always a two-sided thing. Once it spirals that far out of control, it's always a two-sided thing. And it looks like we want to sort of take the power away from the manipulator, but actually we want to make them feel like, oh, I have power. I can do things on my own. I don't need the other person. That's often what it is. They're too weak and they feel like they can't do anything on their own. So they start manipulating everything around them for other people to sort of do it. And so what we need to do is sort of help build up that sort of inner side to it, build up that sort of inner strength. So we actually want to sort of nourish them in a way. Now, on the other side of that, you've got this sort of masochist. And sometimes a masochist can make us turn someone into a sadist, you could say. And these are people that are always taking work away from other people, right? They're going around and they won't let other people sort of achieve things for themselves. They're like, here, I'll do that for you. Here, let me get that. I got that for you. And they can actually turn someone in. They take their power away. When you take work away from someone, when we take the ability for someone to achieve away from them, they get weak very, very quickly. Just like let people do things for themselves, even if they're struggling a little bit. Stand back, right? Kind of like, okay, too much, offer some help, offer some, right? But we want to give, especially our clients, this ability to achieve for themselves. And that's really what's going to, because again, a lot of the time when people come to us, it's because there's an imbalance, right? And so a lot of times it is in some of these very fundamental things. And otherwise, you get these people that are just doing everybody's work. And actually, these people, well, we have to make sure what they do, because this almost becomes that gambler's addiction, right? They keep going back because they're getting an irregular sort of hit of achievement or appreciation. And so they keep going back and they try harder and harder and harder all the time. And so actually the cure for that is the reducing. We want to draw energy away and just say, like, go sit down and relax. Don't do anything for anybody. It's not your responsibility. Of course, you get some people, they have lots of responsibilities, right? They've got children, they've got all kinds of businesses, people relying on them. But we want to kind of draw them out of those unhealthy relationships. And so we can understand a lot of that through these dualities, whether we want to add a heaviness or lightness. What's there and how do we counteract that sort of energy? The hot and cold, we talked about that sort of differences in the sun, how a lot of that, these are those dualities. And we want to sort of understand the world. It's like even that difference between, we understand that depression is related to that coldness and anger is related to that hotness, then we can understand very quickly sort of like, well, we want to sort of warm up the depression. We want to cool off the heat, right? We want to rough and sort of smooth. And there's no inherent sort of like, not one of these is better than the other, right? We always want to find that balance between them. And so it's good to be smooth, but it's good to be kind of hard as well, rigid, right? That sort of dense, that liquid, that's goes in softness, hardness. We want to always find the balance between these sort of attributes. We want to sort of look at nature even and say, what attributes does this tree have? What attributes even does this sort of situation we're in have, right? And so we want to kind of go into that. These general sort of, again, the elements all have these specific attributes of lightness, dryness, hotness. but here we come to the dosh. And I think, have most of you studied the Ayurvedic doshas already, or is this new to you guys? Okay, anyways, a little bit, a little bit. So this is really, it's like first you have one, then you have two, then you get three, then it goes to five. And so in a way, this is now going from five to the three, kind of combining these elements. And so we can get these very basic natures. And there's a guy, I don't know how much you guys are on Instagram. I'm actually not on there much, but I get these repeat things all the time. And there's some guy on there now selling sort of weight loss, and he's like, it's all about just knowing your body type. Right? And he's going, just know your body types. There's only three body types, and he's really charismatic and really tough. Never wears a shirt, right? He doesn't have to, because he's beautiful. And it's funny, right? Because here he is, he's making a fortune off like, know your body types. There's three body types. These are the three body types. It's Vata, Pitta, Kapha. And these are the same body types in the West. They talked about like phlegmatic sort of body types and these fiery body types and these windy sort of body types. And we can see that like this wind. I think if you think of like your pool of friends around you, for example, or your family or the people who are sort of close, you sort of know right away if I say like, who's your windy friend? And you kind of go, oh, that's that person. They're a little bit nervous. They're a little bit scattered all over the place. Hair is usually always a bit frizzy. I just mine's a little frizz today. Must have some wind. And we'll notice that in our own lives. Like we go through these periods where we are a little bit windier. We are a little bit more sort of stuck and slow. Then there's the fieriness, right? Looking to change thing very. Now these kind of match. I think I put them here. Did I? Yeah, the gunas. And so these kind of match the gunas. In a way they do, in a way they don't. But that air element, we want to attach to the sattvic because it's sort of intellectual. It's sort of more penetrating. And how much something can penetrate, or how the word I'm looking for. Well, how sort of subtle it is, right? Kind of,
Air's kind of like above everything too, right? In the way that Sattvic is above everything, it just rises above anything that would keep
yeah.
it down.
Now these are, now we want to pair them, but it's a little bit imperfect pairing when we're comparing it to these three, because the sattvic, of course, it doesn't mean that Vata people are going to be more sattvic, but they're more in their head, right? They're more kind of higher up there in a way. And usually in astrology, the air signs do represent more intellectualism and more thinking. And the Pitta is this more Rajas. And now the Rajasic energy, sometimes they put it like, you see this Tamasic, Rajasic, Sattvic, like it sort of goes 1, 2, 3, higher, lower. In a way, what you have is this Sattvic energy and this Tamasic energy. And in between is this Rajasic energy that's moving us from one to the other, in a sense. And so, okay, it's that space in between. And so Pitta is also it's very fiery. It's very changing. The Rajasic energy, it's a transformative energy. It builds heat. And so sometimes even as, and we'll get into this more when we get into the planets one by one, some of these more specific sort of remedies, because in a way, the sun and the moon energy is like, that's what you get from your mama and papa. That's like what you get from God. A lot of our freedom, or what we think on more of a materialistic sort of free will way, is the lower planets, where we can sort of affect some of that karmas, right? Now, if we're talking spiritual freedom, which is the exact opposite from the free will down there, then we are talking more the sun energy and that sun freedom. And so there's there's some confusion sometimes. Like I get people all the time, so I'm not free. Well, that depends how strong your third house is. It depends how strong your Mars is. Right? The freedom they're looking for. They want that free will to go out and get and achieve what they want in this world. That's down here with the planets. That's a sort of a free will. That's Mars. If you're strong and sort of powerful and you're not afraid of confrontation, well then you got all kinds of free will, like the big buff guy who's selling right weight loss sort of stuff, right? He's got that strong Mars. He's fully sort of self-willed within this world. And now in Tantra, we want to be self-willed. We want that freedom in the material world, but we also want the spiritual freedom. Where the Orthodox people are almost afraid of the material world, and they're just like, just go for spiritual freedom, man. Like, and they're right. Well, a lot of ways, just go for the spiritual freedom because the kind of freedom you get in this world, well, on one hand, it's messy. It's really messy, right? But if you just go direct for spiritual freedom, it's quite a. Anyways, get away from all this mess of the material world. And so Orthodox gurus, they're right, man. They're not joking around when they say like, just leave all that tantra alone, leave all that energy, leave all that messy, mucky, dirty, shadowy stuff alone. Right? Just dedicate your life to God. Welcome. Um, right, let's get messy. Um, and so we're down here in the muck, and I should mention there actually in the Hindu culture, we think of the Brahmins as this high caste, but there's always these castes within castes. And so the Brahmins who actually become doctors and surgeons, especially surgeons, they become outcast Brahmins. They get sort of kicked. They're still Brahmins, but they're untouchable Brahmins because they went and got messy and dirty with all of this stuff down here in this material world. And so that's what we're kind of doing here. Now, I've debated whether or not to add these. They're very simple. I'm sure you all know that. Very simple quizzes. You can go online and find out your exact body type. You can kind of think about this as well. And now in astrology, I really make a difference between the physical body type and the mental body type. Goes very, very sort of different, right? You can have someone with a very kapha heavy body with a very vata mind, right? The mind is always just going on, but they're really big and heavy sort of people, right? I used to joke too, like we can use this for if you have a business, right? You can use these sort of things for hiring practice. If you got some job where you just want someone to just sit around and do nothing all day, you want someone with that kapha body type where they can just sit there and do nothing all day. But if they're at the computer and they're doing internet work or all your reception stuff, then you want maybe a vata mind on that big heavy body. So just park yourself there and go crazy on the phone and the computer sort of idea, right? Um, it's different too. If you really want to get things done and there's a lot of physical work, of course you want a fiery, a pitta sort of body type, that physical activity. Now, they say other things like the pitta people are usually the healthiest. You could say their internal organs generally are the healthiest. They feel that inflammation on the body, and that's because of their activity. They're more prone to accidents. So it's like general advice is it's like, oh well, you're fat and you're heavy, so go do more exercise, right? Because you're otherwise that fatness is going to kind of break down your organs. And it's like, okay, well, they can go do more exercise. That'll help heal their inner body. But now they're going to be dealing with more external injuries, especially if they have the heavy body and they start jogging, right? Their knees are going to go in no time. Different things are going to go out in no time very quickly. And so it's kind of like this sort of moderation all the time and finding that balance, even in our own lives, balancing, juggling the three sides. Um, because we all have all parts of these in ourselves. Um, and but we do want to mostly do things that are going to be good for the body. And so for the kapha personality, you do want to add some heat. You want to get things moving. You want to get things burning, right? So more spicy foods, more bring up the temperatures, get things moving, becomes a big thing. With the Vata, it's like, Vata is very tricky. And it's almost in a way like you can say, you can't do anything with Vata personalities because everything you do is going to kind of put them out of balance in a little bit of a different way because they're windy, they're all over the place. And so, but they can be cold. And so oftentimes with Vatas, you do want to warm them up, but very gentle heat, slow heat. I just got a connection. My connection might be a little unstable, but I hope you're hearing me okay. But with Vatas again, you want to have that heat. With Kapha, you almost want to like light a fire under them. Get that heat up very quickly, very fast, burn it. Some Zumba, right? Some quick aerobic, something to get the heat up very quick, short duration, hot. Okay, just relax, no problem. Okay, get it up again. With Vatas, you want to warm them very slowly, very gently. Otherwise, they get like that fire and wind go together, right? They get very sharp and very cutting and very critical and very like Kalima comes out, right? Too much wind and too much heat. Just for on the other hand, just for what can you say? Just for transparency reasons, my mind is nothing but fire and wind. Makes me crazy. That's why I'm writing 6,000-page documents. Very critical and very a lot of that mental stuff. And so one of the best things you can do for Vata is give it some direction. Okay, go blow over there. And you kind of try to channel it a little bit. Channel some of that nervous energy. Knitting, right? These simple things become remedies sometimes for a Vata. That nervous energy can go out on knitting. Mala beads. Lots of people love mala beads. Just playing with that mala bead. No problem. Some mantras, some simple mantras for a Vata. Just let the wind get channeled. No problem. Let the wind go. It's no problem with wind. We all like wind. And so when we talk that way, actually, it's the Kapha people that are the easiest to get along with, right? They're just chill and easygoing and sitting there and soft and almost cuddly like the big teddy bear. You want to go hug the big Kapha person, and they're warm and they got this kind of warm sort of glow. And so we see, like, even in astrology, the Jupiter connections are usually more Kapha because they have that warmth, that glow of the guru in a sense. Where the Pittas are a little bit fiery and a little bit harsh. And it's like I go out here and I go out. I've got a lot of Pitta in my body type, and my physical look is very Pitta. And people, I'll get talking to someone, they're like, "Oh yeah, I've been seeing you. You're always here working. You're always here kind of doing something." I didn't want to bother you. I didn't want to talk to you because you always look like you're a little bit busy. But it's also because I've got that Pitta body type, right? So it's like I look like I'm a little bit mean. I'm a little bit harsh. I'm a little bit cutting. And so they're like, I'll just leave that fire alone. And so the Pittas have a bit of that, where they're a little bit fiery, they're a little bit harsh. Now I have Jupiter aspecting all that stuff fire. And so anyway, so you guys come eventually, they're like, oh, well, actually kind of a nice guy. But we get that generally through, we can see it through the body types in a way. The way we experience people, we experience that Pitta. We feel it through our moon. We can be very sensitive to this. Like, I remember like learning about all these body types. I was studying these classics and talking to my Guruji about them. And then I started looking at kind of Western yoga and stuff. And then they just put these like little charts like this and said, well, here's your body type and here you can check. And I was always like, well, why don't use a checkbox to find your body type? Think about it. Feel how you experience life. Is it windy? Is it fiery? Is it heavy? See how you would experience not even just other people, but the atmosphere that's around you. That's that moon, is that sort of atmospheric conditions. And so just feel what you're absorbing. And really what the moon has a lot to do, it's also that part of healing. I mentioned the cleaning, like clean your house. But like sometimes we're dealing with people that have a little bit bigger problems than just their house is dirty. Um, their whole sort of culture and lifestyle sort of needs a change. And in a way, it's like, well, the sun message from sun is like, okay, well, you don't like your life, change yourself. The lesson for moon in a way is like, it's like you don't like your life, well, change your environment. And that'll really help you. And so you change your friends, you change your job, you change your living conditions, you try to clean it up. What clean up, when we say clean up your life, we're kind of saying like purify your moon. Oh, wow, I just noticed your dog looks just like Andrian's. I think hers is a bit lighter. Well, I do the same thing. Um, but anyway, so we try to sort of clean up our lives to a certain degree for the moon. And the best way to do that is to kind of get to know it through these different, like the gunas, and get to understand the situation. Like I mentioned, the flavors. And so we get this, the moon, it rules a salty flavor. So the moon is like both longing, but it's also salty. It's also, each of these planets has a certain way of persuading people in a way. And the moon is very passive. The moon is very like salty. It's like, come to me in a way. It wants to draw in like salt. It wants to draw in the flavors, wants to draw in that emotion. And so people who are very strongly ruled by moon, they kind of, it's how they persuade. They kind of want to draw people to them, right? And they do that because they're sensitive to their environment. They're sensitive kind of to what people want. And that's the moon is, what makes that moon energy so dangerous. It has a lot to do with our, that sort of initial desire, that initial want. And so people who are very strongly moon, they know what people want. And people kind of know what they want also. And so they're able to just sort of give it to them, right? It's like it's almost like you could say like that pregnant mama that's in the family. Now we're talking big Indian farmers, people all around them. And it's like, now everybody sort of knows what this pregnant woman wants, and everybody sort of take care of her, and everybody's sort of drawn to that. And then her herself becomes very emotional and very sensitive to everything that's around her. Right. So especially the pregnant woman, that's like the full sensitive mood, right? Then you bring that into your house or bring that into your family. And so you've got this very, you don't really know if it's waxing or waning sometime. Um, but of course, the other women, especially if they've been mothers themselves and things like this, then they know just what she wants. And so that sensitivity to sort of taste things. And it's that longing, it's that want, it's like that first. And now, in a way, it's like if we think of how something comes from nothing to become something. That's a lot of what we're talking about. The whole tattvas is showing how nothing becomes something, basically. And so the moon is that stage of like the sun and the moon come together, and now there's this like desire for something more, desire to kind of create the universe, create the world, and then all the rest comes out of that. And it's like an energy.
Mike,
Hello.
I have a question. So when you say strong moon, does that mean like where it's placed in the house in the chart, or how other planets are around it? What does that mean actually?
Well, it could be different. It can mean a little bit different things. So it can mean like a strong moon is it's in its own sign or it's exalted, or it's, a strong moon might be a full moon in the 9th or the 10th house or something like that. Really good house. Um, it might
High
be,
Chad Bala as well, I guess.
pardon me,
A high Chad Bala.
a little bit high shot ball. I get some high scores from different reasons from the shot ball has a lot to do with the position in the chart and whether it's full and a lot of these things actually. And so the shot ball would make a difference, but something like nice influences from say Jupiter or Venus or what they call benefic planets would also give a strong moon. Um, but it's almost like there's almost two things in astrology. There's a strength or a sensitivity to the moon. Almost those are almost two different things. But there's a dignity to the planets as well. And so a planet can be very, very strong and have very low dignity. And so you might find that, say, in a gangster's chart, for example, where the planet's very, very strong and giving really nice results, but there's no dignity in it. There's nothing good is actually coming from that fruit. Kind of spoiled fruit that they're getting. But it's all right. They're getting something from it, but yeah. So there's sort of different sort of things going on. And now that's planetary. But again, without even thinking about the astrology chart, we can think of the people we know who are quite moony and they want to sort of take care of others because they have that sort of sensitivity to their surroundings. Now, people who have dark moons, they get very offended actually. I find it funny sometimes. People with the dark moon sometimes get offended because I say, well, you've got a dark moon, and so actually your moon isn't that sensitive, and you can be a little bit emotionally cruel. And they go, no, I'm very sensitive, and you do. You see a lot of mystics with this moon, but the reason they're able to go into the mysticism and the way they're able to go into all this darkness is because they're not very sensitive. And so they're able to spend on really like, you'll get a lot of the people who are, say, more focused, and even in the teacher wise, are more focused on a lot of the dark shadow works and going into that darkness with people. And maybe they're dealing even like more with more disturbed people who are quite schizophrenic and things like this, or people that you have to, maybe even their remedies become very harsh remedies. And the only way they're able to do this is because they have a dark moon and they're not very sensitive. And it's like, if you want to be a surgeon, well, you can't be very sensitive because how many people die under the surgeon knife? And if you're really, really sensitive to all that, forget it. Go home. Go become I don't know, go put on women's circles on dark moon nights instead of being a surgeon, kind of thing, right? And so you need that sort of sensitivity. Again, if you're a woman putting on dark moon nights, chances are you have the fuller moon because you're sensitive and you know what people want. You're going to bring the flowers and you're going to make the atmosphere very nice and wholesome, and you're going to sort of caretake for that night. And if you have the dark moon, well, it's going to be a little bit more of a dark dive into your dark moon's woman night, you could say. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking, so like if somebody has a very sensitive moon, but then that brings them to be really sensitive to other people's, issues, they can really feel exactly what's going on. But then to balance that out for them to be able to handle that information and be able to actually act upon it and not just be like, like affected by it, then they can have something else in their chart that balances out that really sensitive moon, like, I don't know, like a good Saturn placement or something like that.
Yeah,
Then that would be helpful, right? Like, for example, maybe in that case, that person with a very sensitive moon would be able to be a surgeon, like in a metaphorical sense, because they have like another placement that balances out, or?
Well, you could say, yeah, so if it's full moon, we'd say, oh, the sensitive moon, but some Saturn or some Mars would make them a little bit cold or harsher, you could say. Ketu and Saturn are for people doing like surgeon or these really harsh treatments. Ketu and Saturn are really good for those sorts of things, actually. Probably better even than the dark moon, you could say, because they're kind of, with the Ketu, they go a little bit emotionally numb. And with the Saturn, they're kind of emotionally cold and they're emotionally hard. And so they're able to carry out these really sort of harsh, activities. And they're kind of harsher people. And so it's becomes a remedy doing those kind of harsh healings in a way. Yeah. And something like Jupiter, they say Jupiter's amazing. And this is, again, this is kind of what you come here. Jupiter's philosophy, and we'll go into Jupiter later. classes. But Jupiter's amazing. His influence brings hope and optimism. And so no matter how dark the moon is and sort of how harsh conditions can be, sometimes just some influence from having good Jupiter, good guru figures, good people to kind of give you direction. And then, of course, if you have some meaning and purpose in your life, is the best remedy for everything, because, well, you're willing to sacrifice everything and suffer through everything if you have meaning and purpose. And so these sorts of remedies, I say, but natural remedies we get in our charts, and so we get attracted to these things that naturally sort of help us out in life in a lot of ways. So,
Or like would it help, like for example, if you have a very sensitive moon, if you have the moon in Cancer, which is its own sign, and then you have, but it's in the Pushya nakshatra, which is Saturn, right?
yeah, that's
Like,
yeah, exactly. So that's Saturn, and that's very, like, Pushya, for example, is a very good one because it's very sort of harsh and or it's a hard space, but they're able to continue things for a long time. It's like building your house out of stone. It's a little bit of cold and a hard house that they're living in, space they're living in, but it'll continue. That house will be there for generations. If we look at the flavors of the planets, so like something like Jupiter we mentioned, it's that sweetness. And so it even brings that sweet flavor to the moon. And so we kind of, if we don't have some sweetness around us, we look for that. And that's really what they say that about, say, the guru's words, for example. They're very sweet. They're very, but too much of that guru is too much sweetness. And then you get other problems. But it's very sweet. Mercury is kind of a nice energy because it's a mixed flavor. And so Mercury's almost can act when we're thinking of healing, can be a little bit like a mix master in a way, but it's trying to see both sides of things and doesn't really have a preference. Mercury's kind of nice. It's a little bit, in a way, it's a little bit like the moon in a sense, that he'll just imitate whatever flavors are there. Which usually isn't great for the moon, a little bit difficult influence on the moon, Mercury, because for the moon, Mercury thinks too much. Too much mercurial influence on the moon, it's too much mental chatter. And again, that's a lot of our clients will come to us, so just like, my brain can't shut up, sort of thing. And so we want to bring that mental chatter down in a way. And a lot of times, like, I get a lot of clients like this in the astrology. It's actually, I mean, it's part of the reason I first started charging money, actually, because I get a lot of these students and they go online and they're reading everything they can from all these different astrologers, and they're going to see and talk to like every astrologer that will possibly do their chart for free and not charge anything for it. And they're getting all of this stuff, and all they're doing is getting more and more mentally confused, more mentally disturbed. And so I will still, once in a while, I'll do charts for free for people online, but I'm very clear. Like, I can be quite harsh on these people. I'm a little bit of a bully, a little bit mean to them, because then I'll be like, "Well, how many astrologers have you seen this month?" And they'll be like, "Oh, I've seen like 20 astrologers," and I'll be like, "Okay, I'll do your chart for free. Don't talk to any astrologers. Don't study any astrologers for 1 month. I'll do your chart for nothing. Try to get all of that out of your head, and then I'll make your chart." And that does one of two things. Either they get away from it for a month, or they don't come back to me. And so I'm kind of good with either, right? Because I don't want to just add to their confusion. I don't want to add that mercurial element to the moon and make them think more and more of stuff. And I want to ground them a little bit. I want to make them feel like, oh, this astrologer's serious. Right? So if they go to me and they come to me, then maybe they take that as a bit of a base to listen to. And so the moon is quite sensitive. We have to be a little bit, it's like Devi mantras, for example. They say mantras to the Devi. We can't just do the mantras like we can for the ones to the gods, to the sun, the masculine deities. we have to make sure we give the Devi what she likes. And so we should, before we do any like the mantras to the feminine deities, we should actually have a shower, purify ourselves, clean ourselves, put on some clean clothes. There's a lot of times, like when I do the Durga mantra, there's a whole bunch of mantras I do before I do Durga mantra to kind of ritually sort of cleanse myself and things like this. And so that sort of ritual cleansing generally. And it's like if I want to honor the lake, I don't want to just give it to anything. And they say like Shiva is this god, he'll just accept anything. You can give Shiva anything, right? You can give him drugs, you can give him booze, you can give him meat and dead bodies and absolutely anything at all. And Shiva's just like, thank you for thinking of me. That's so sweet. Right? She was just so happy, just with any, it's like, here, Shiva, this is all I have, take it. And he's like, oh, thank you, you thought of me, wonderful. And moon isn't quite like that. You have to be a little bit more careful with moon practices. You have to give her what she likes. It's like, well, some Devis, and the moon has many faces and many Devis, and in a way, like our own moon chakra, on our own, whatever own preferences is kind of the face of that Devi, that flavor that you prefer is the face of your Devi in a way. And so that Devi, you want to give her what she likes, what she longs for, what she wants. You want to satisfy her. You want to make her happy. And so then we're here on Tantra and we're trying to make our material bodies healthy. We're trying to make our home, our environment happy so that our environment makes us happy. Right? If it's like happy mama, happy house. Right? If mama's happy, the house is happy. So everybody just make sure mama's happy. If mama's not happy, nobody's going to be happy. Right? And so, well, I'm living here on this garden. So I quite literally have to make these plants happy or they're going to die. And when this woman gets back, she's not going to have any food coming from her garden. And well, anyway, she'll go to the market. But anyways, you got to take care of mama. And then mama takes care of you. And so that's in a way, like we have to sort of give ourselves a bit of what we like. And a lot of that is churning. At certain points, that whole ocean of milk has to churn also. We have to be separated from what we like to know what we like. Right? Because when it's there too much, you don't know. And so you kind of go away and those things that you're longing for, you're hoping for, you're looking for that flavor. And so as a traveler, I find those same flavors in different faces in different ways all over the world. And so it's the same with the flavors that we really, really like. We want to satisfy those. And so we can see these different ways of doing that. Now, I wanted to talk about this a little bit. I'll come to the sun. I didn't know whether to put all of this together or put it in the different sections. When I put it together, because I thought, well, now this moon section, you've got a section on Ayurveda. And it pretty much covers everything in Ayurveda. God, we could do 10 classes on this on this moon section. And so one class just isn't cutting it at all, but we'll do what we can. And so let's look at this. And this is kind of, there's some interesting things here. So right away we see it says the moon rules Rasa Dhatu. And in Ayurveda that translates as the fluids of the body, which is a very horrible and very limited translation of what rasa is. Because rasa is what I've been talking about. It's our ability to taste the essence, the essential flavors of things, and to absorb the essence. Right? The moon wants to absorb the power of the sun. And the more it's able to do that, the stronger the moon is. And so it wants to absorb those essences from the area, the space around it. And so it gets to know the space around it. It gets to know it. It's this flowing, it's this movement. Now, what we're going to notice is there's often, I'll get to that in a minute. I'll just I'm going to go through this a little bit step by step. so the fluids of the body, that's also the moon rules over the hormonal system. When we think of the tides of the body, that's what we're talking about, the tides of the hormones. And I'll attach some charts in the Mars section. I've got a bunch on circadian rhythms and the rhythms that they use on the timing by season and day that Ayurveda uses, the timing by seasons, excuse me, and day that traditional Chinese medicine are attached. I'll send that right after right after this class. And so that's a lot of these. Has a lot to do with a lot of those rhythms, they say have a lot to do with the connection between moon and Mars. So that's why I put it in the Mars section. And we can see the relationship between moon and Mars very closely, because the moon rules all that blood plasma and the white blood cells, while Mars rules the red blood cells. And so there's a lot in the blood between moon and Mars. That's kind of our whole sort of blood system in a way. Now, we'll go into those things. Well, maybe I'll kind of give an overview of a lot of this. And so Mars rules that whole, like the cortisol, the whole stress response in the body. And all of that sort of like that side of the hormonal system, you could say. That is the stress response. Venus rolls over all the pleasure responses and all the pleasuring hormones in the body. And now again, I think this has a lot to do with that relationship these planets have with the moon, because the moon is those rhythms generally. And if the moon is harshly damaged, then the person's rhythms are going to be out generally. So like, oh, you might see it someone who's working nights or someone who's up all night and sleeps all day sort of thing. Their rhythms are out and they're going to end up getting health problems just because of that. Well, especially in that case, they're complete opposite from the natural rhythms. And so there's going to be consequences for that. Anytime we step out of the natural rhythms, there's going to be consequences. That's Debbie. She punishes her children, man. She's don't mess with mama, right? She'll like throw a spoon at you or like throw the shoe at you or whatever mama did, right? At the end of the day, you want to kind of follow mama's example. You want to follow that. And so that has a lot to do, and that's what will go out. Like if we're sleeping all day and up all night, it's the hormonal imbalance that's going to go out. And then the problems are going to come from that. And so the closer we can go with nature, yeah, please go ahead.
I'm resonating a lot with what you're saying about the moon and the white blood cells. And I'm curious when you're saying that Mars is like the stress response and Venus is the pleasure hormones and those things. And then would Mercury kind of be the nervous system, where then the moon with the white blood cells can kind of, by following the nature of the moon, we can get into balance with our white blood cells so that we can help bring a balance to all of our personal planet systems, like the nervous system, the stress response system, and the pleasure system. So if we're out of balance with our moon, then all of our other responses are out. So is that kind of it?
That's exactly it. The moon,
Amazing.
in a way, it's like, the moon is like, to use kind of Chinese medicine terminology, it's this gathering place of all the resonances. So from all the other planets, from all of our senses, right? Everything we're picking up from this world all sort of gathers in the moon. And then it's also this gathering place of the resonance of this great spirit. So whatever we have for that internal spirit. So it's this gathering place of all those sorts of resonance. It's the mind, right? You see something and it comes back in some reflection in the mind, right? And you see your whatever. If it's important to you, if it means something to you, then you really see it more. If it doesn't mean anything to you, you don't see it if there's no resonance. In a way, it's like, I love Martian Mark. Andriane, did you know Martian Mark? Mars Mark? No, anyways, he was a crazy guy, but then one day I took a long walk with him and realized he wasn't actually that crazy. Well, he was, but he wasn't, because he was always talking about these aliens and these lights and these energies coming from space, and he'd be like, yeah, you know, oh, it's coming like that, like really the crazy guy. But then I talked to him and I was like, and he said, like, take these poles coming down the road. He's like, those have always been there. He says they've never not been there. It's just when we got knowledge of them and were capable of seeing, then we were capable of seeing them. Before we had any knowledge of it, we didn't even see it. And it's a lot that way in the world out there. If we don't notice something, we don't know something, we don't even see it. Our eye doesn't even, if it's not already inside of us, our eyes won't even see it. It won't even exist for us. It's like,
It's like astrology. Like once you bring into an awareness someone's moon and how their mind works, then they kind of learn how to take care of themselves, and then their whole body kind of balances out because you bring into an intellectual awareness to something that's more watery, so you can kind of direct it a little
yeah,
more.
it's like, until this moment, my keys didn't exist for you. It was the furthest thing from your mind. Right now, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, got keys. It fully exists, and it's like right there, right?
And what are you going to do with them now? Like, what are you going
Well,
to do with them?
Yeah,
It's so
nothing
cute.
with them, but yeah, just throwing a red herring and on you guys. That's all I did with the keys. But they'll come up again, I'll bet you. Right, there'll be that. There's an example. It's just a very objectified keys. And so we get this thing, but we can also, through this knowledge of how all of these sort of things are connected with the moon, then we see when we have one problem in our life, or when our clients have one problem in our life, we can kind of get a sense and see it through everything, right? I'll come back to the other stuff. I'll keep going here. So it's like this next stage, it talks about like this sense of trust, this sense of good perception, clarity, stamina, compassion. It's like when your moon is damaged, when you're emotionally damaged, all of these things, you don't see the world as clear as you could. You don't have that sort of strength you could. You don't see the beauty in the world. Your own skin, maybe there's some problems, some darkness. Kind of comes in the complexion. They put these lines like a strong moon brings music and perfume to life. That's because a strong moon is sensitive. It can feel all of that. So if your moon is sensitive and in nice dignity, then you're not going to be able to stand being in a dirty place. You're just going to go away from it. It's just not going to be comfortable. So you have to have it clean. You're not going to be able to stand a bad smell. And so you're going to have a nice sort of smell around you, right? Or harsh sounds, you can't deal with that. And I did notice this actually in my own life, of course. Well, before I left on pilgrimage and all that, no, I was in the West. I was studying martial arts and philosophy and stuff, but I was working like this construction lifestyle. Right, I worked my way up from being a labor boy to being a big boss man, and so it was just fairly typical construction lifestyle in Canada. I was on the road then too, traveling around, but hanging out in these bars, hanging out with these hard construction dudes, and right, heavy equipment and harsh noises and harsh environments and everything was really hard. Now I can't stand to be in any of those kind of environments. Like I have some old friends who still drink, and so I'll go to their neighborhood pub with them once in a while in Canada. But I'm not. I like it if there's like nobody there and it's all right and I can relax. But I can't stand those harsh energies. It's just it repels me in a way. And so that's part of that moon, that sort of purification of moon is you're not going to like those harshnesses of life as much when you become more sensitive, because well, then you can taste that ugly, bad taste. right? And so who wants to have a bad taste in their mouth? So that's kind of, these are the sort of moon energies. We see the fertility, the tides of the body. Now, some of this stuff I haven't really, like, I just haven't worked with clients enough and asked enough questions, but the women astrologers here maybe know more about this. This relationship between moon and your chart, moon and Mars in your chart, and the transiting of the moon and Mars. And so they sometimes say like the periods will get triggered sometimes by this closeness, by moon transiting Mars in your chart, for example, or the transiting Mars. And so there's this sort of relationship in the chart between these planets. I need to find my more research on that. I've got it somewhere. But anyways, the women can kind of watch that in your own chart, where these planets are transiting. We know there's going to be all these psychic problems with moon, the fevers. A lot of times, if there's a lot of stress and too much stress on the moon, it's going to affect the digestion. It's going to affect the elimination. It's going to affect that whole watery system. Someone with too much, say, Saturn and too much depression, that's a dry moon. So one of the remedies for that is actually like ghee, to start eating ghee, because that will help bring moisture to the whole system in a way. And it brings that warmth of Jupiter a little bit to their system. But sometimes just drinking more water. And with Saturn, you might want to even say mineral waters, especially if there's some Saturn sun influence. The minerals will be down low, and so you might need some mineral supplements somehow. But the moon also is those kind of, because the sun is the minerals. So you'll get this all kinds of problems with the blood can come out through moon. The moon is a little bit tricky on its own. The moon is generally, say, like the full moon is Ka. The thin moon, the dark moon, is usually more Vata. And so that's where we get this idea too, where like Kapha people are generally fairly stable and healthy, but the dark moon is more Vata. It's more thin, and Vata people generally they're always facing some small little problem in their life. Always something kind of coming up in their health, little issues here and there. And so we get these kind of things. Now, oh yeah, I wanted to make sure I came back to this. So they have these maturation dates. Every planet matures at its different age. And so we reach our emotional maturity by the age of 24. And so that's kind of the culture we've had up until about the age of 24 is going to be the culture we're going to kind of have for the rest of our lives in a lot of ways. And so that's where a lot of this sort of early childhood development becomes very, very important, because these planets, these energies, they mature, they kind of become who they are at these maturation age. And so the moon is like by 24, we can see the sun is, I don't have these memorized. We see the sun is 22, kind of who we are kind of ideas. Mars is also quite young, age 28. And so we see how these sorts of, like, how these things sort of mature and get stronger. And we can see in Mars, for example, it's like, well, that 21 or 22-year-old kid, they're really strong and they can be very tough and coordinated, maybe even trained, say, right, Mars, we're talking about the warrior. But that person that's 30, their strength is, and I remember this, for example, like I used to wrestle around with uncles and stuff, right? The kind of family you could just like jump on someone and try to tackle them. And of course, they always beat me. But that was kind of the whole point. But there was this kind of maturity that comes in our power and our sense of even our free will, where it's fully mature by the time we're 30. Whereas a little bit younger, that Mars energy, the sun is kind of who we are. And the moon has kind of set our emotional boundaries in a sense. But that Mars energy still maturing. We still haven't fully come into our own power yet. until the Mars energy matures. Mercury too is very old. It's like learning. This is why we kind of education system is set up like by the time you're 32, you can have a PhD, for example. And so that's kind of learning all the way up to there. And after about the age of 32, or start to kind of, well, we might have a plateau a little bit, but we're going to start to deteriorate in our learning to a certain degree. So these sort of in that timing of things and timing of when you want to do things. And so think of like that mercurial timing. If you want to be, say, a kid is growing up and your student clients want to be a student or an author, you might want to say, well, just practice and just learn until your early 30s, right? Try to aim for about 32 for publishing, say, a first book or something like that. Or that's going to be when the maturity of an author might be, for example, or those kind of practices. The guru matures very young, 16. And so this is where you hear about this a lot nowadays. There's a lot of more attention. Like when I was growing up, it was all on mamas. And the mama was just like, that was it. Papa didn't even matter. And there was a lot more awareness coming to the father in the life, to have someone who sort of gives them some direction. And that guru energy matures at age 16. And so it's quite young by the time that they sort of, a child is going to get their sort of purpose in life. And well, I think this has a lot to do with I'm not a big fan of the education system at all, especially public education system. I also, like, I did a lot of university stuff in my 20s. I never finished anything because I could never stand it. As soon as I was expected to kind of fall into line with the politics of the education system, I dropped out. I was done. And so, but part of this is because it also holds back people. Because really, by the age of 16, a kid should be able to, they should have some direction in life and their own direction to a certain degree. And so they should be able to sort of set their own way and make their own way in life by about the age of 16 and that sort of things. And we really hold them back and we say, no, you're just a dumb kid. Basically until they're 32 and they have that right? We expect them to have the PhD or a whole bunch of work experience and stuff, and then we start to show them respect. Through a lot of my astrology research, now I studied history before too, and that's always been something I really enjoy. But I've been kind of going into this, into the specific people, and it's very interesting because, well, a lot of these people we think are these great people from history. They joined the army at age 12. They were brigadier general by the age of 14. They were right general of the whole armies of the country by the time they were 24 years old. And this is remarkable because in our day and age, 24-year-olds are still children, or still basically treated as children by society. And so there's these sort of maturation dates, and we want to kind of do a little bit early. Venus, our sense of beauty, our sense of appreciation, basically matures by age of 25. These kinds of things. Now I called this class the City of 8, but there's 10 classes. And so we get Rahu and Ketu, and I haven't mentioned them at all yet, but I just want to mention them quickly because they're the outcasts of the city, right? We've got this City of 8, our mind, our fire, our moon, our sun, all that internal qualities, all of these senses of who we are. We even have like this nature around us, which is the moon. It's like we have a few different bodies. We've got this body, this very limited body here. But we've got this body of nature where it's like your soul is the center of your body and the rest of it revolves around that. Your soul, body, mind, and soul, this capsule you're in, is the center of this larger body of nature that surrounds you. And so from one perspective, we can have the same relationship with our body as we have with nature around us. And we can use it as an extension of ourselves, just like we use our body. And so we can use nature as an extension of our own being. And we do, right? We use it to make money, we use it to food, we use it for comfort, we use it for everything. And so that's just using it as an extension of our own body. And in Tantra, we want to be connected to it in that way, because if you're like, well, this nature is something different, well, then you're not going to show it any respect. But try to show nature, like sometimes say, well, your body is your temple. Well, what exactly is your body? Is it just this limited form? Or is your body this body of nature, everything that's around you? And so from that regard, it's like, well, your body is your temple. You've got a pretty big temple to take care of. And so in some sense, we're all kind of caretakers of nature. One of those controversial lines in the Bible, right? That sort of says like, command nature. Well, you can command it. You can be the sun where you command it and sort of like set yourself separate from nature and sort of command it as this object and use it. Or you can be in relationship with nature. Right? And we know people, I don't know if you guys are single or in relationships, but we know people have these beautiful relationships, right? With a partner, for example, beautiful marriages. Well, have that relationship, that beautiful marriage with nature, right? Then you're going to respect nature. Right? You're giving it what it wants, but you respect it. You're treating it nice. And that's really like, if you can be nice to nature, you almost don't need anything else in this world. But there's a Rahu and Ketu energy everywhere. These Rahu and Ketu energy, and it's separate. And I treated it as a one because it's actually as one. And so this Rahu Ketu energy is this. It's this unpredictableness of things. In a way, it's your own ignorance. A lot of ways, Rahu and Ketu don't actually exist. In a way, they're not part of nature. They're aberrations of nature. In a sense, they're aberrations, or they're the exceptions. They're the shadows, the smoke. How they affect us in our own lives is just through our mind. And so they're that deeper affliction. A lot of times they don't even really exist out there in the world. They just exist in your own mind. And so there's these very shadowy energies. And so it's like, for example, it's like, well, I said, be nice to nature, be nice to people, respect them, give them what they like, and they'll give back to you the same way. Sometimes we don't know what they like. A lot of times Rahu is, say, this energy of like, this sense of the best intentions is the road to hell. Right? You know that saying? And as healers, we have to remind ourselves of that all the time. Right? That's like, be careful of your good intentions, man. Those are dangerous. But Rahu and Ketu can sometimes be these good intentions. And it's that danger, it's that hidden danger, it's that danger you can't anticipate or that you're not anticipating. So it's like, well, I was just trying to do something good. Well, thanks a lot. You just ruined their life, right? Kind of. And so it's also makes it very, very sort of dangerous, this whole healing thing that we're doing. You can say all of this energy work we're doing. And it's very, very dangerous because, well, are you healing through truth, or are you healing through your good intentions? And are your good intentions actually doing any good? And we have to be, we'll get into more of this, but we have to be very critical with ourselves. And in a way, anything that comes up for you, you want to kind of cycle it through the energies of all the planets. I'm going to talk about this more in the Mars period. Once we get into the 5, then we get into really what that cycle is. It's like Moon is kind of like, okay, it's the cycle. and the 5 planets, so it's kind of like that's what's cycling in a sense. The elements. You say it's like the elements themselves. You've got space that's kind of like, well, it's just space for the other 4 to cycle. So you get all kinds of different cycles that we can look at and we can learn as energy workers. Because it's cycles within cycles within cycles. And like I think of the Vimshatari cycles from Vedic astrology. And so it's like, okay, well, you got a sun, moon, Mars, Rahu, Jupiter, right? So you get this certain way that energy, a certain, what can you say, a certain pattern that it's following. And sometimes in Tantra, you get Tantras that's called like, well, I don't know if it's Tantra. Someone made a yoga style, I think he called it Krama Yoga. And Krama is just, it's these sequences. There are these certain patterns that everything is flowing through. And you get that in some of the, in the Kaula traditions of Tantra, the female, it's these cycles of just ways of understanding those cycles. Pratyabhijana, they break the moment into like 12 different parts. So you can understand how the moment arises. You can understand its progression to the peak of a moment, right? And then it's falling away. And you can see that in the cycles of the astrology. You can see that in the Chinese medicine cycles between the elements. There's certain ways that these things relate. And so in a way, it's like you get some bright idea, run it through all of the cycles first, right? Run it through your Mars, run it through your Mercury, run it, right? Bring it to the warriors, bring it to the critical people, bring it to the mercurial people, the mercurial brain, right? Look at it from both sides and look at it from that Jupiter. Is it humanistic? Is there going to be some good to it? Look at it from, who am I missing? Venus. Does it have beauty? Is it harmony? Is it fair? Right? And so look at it from all these sorts of different criterias before you say, oh, my idea is a good idea, in a sense. Before you bring it, well, before anything comes to fruition, it's going to kind of go through all these cycles anyways in some sort of form, but we want to do that with awareness. Be aware of it going through those different cycles. Now, we also get like, because all those energies have their own relationships with each other, as you go through that, there's going to be certain energies that are just antagonistic to your idea to begin with. Right? It's like a computer scientist, for example. Well, maybe they can see some beauty in it, but you get some very dry sort of work, right? So Venus, doesn't matter how you look at it, Venus might not sort of agree with what you're doing, or it might not be fair. And who you are is going to be like, I often say, well, I don't say, everybody says, we generally belong to the devas or the rakshas. And we're going to follow one of those kind of teachings as a way to kind of navigate life. And so is it beautiful? Is it just? Right? And we're all going to, even in different periods of our life, we're going to have areas where we kind of go towards more of one of those things than the other.
Mark?
Hello. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. I was wondering if you could give an example of, yeah, I was wondering if you could give an example of like, having an idea and running it through the planets, if you don't mind. Like, what would that look like? You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah. So what could you say? So I get an idea. I want to do a course. I get a bright idea. Mike, you should do a course. Everybody wants you to teach, you should go and do it. And so it's like, first I'm going to be a little bit critical with myself because I'm quite Mars orientated. Well, can you do a course? Is that possible? Right? And so I'm going, yeah, okay, yeah, it's possible. And so I get past the critics, right? Who says maybe you can't do that. No, I can do it. So I get past Mars. And then I get through to Jupiter. And I look at Jupiter, I'm like, well, if I'm gonna do a course, I want it to be something that's useful for other people. They're gonna learn from it. They're gonna get something from it. For me, I sort of want to be engaged in things as well, and so I want to get something from the course. And so is it going to be something that's going to be engaging for me? And then I might look at I might go and consult Venus and talk to Venus, and Venus will say, well, is it beautiful? I'll go, no, it's a really beautiful idea. It's this, oh, I got this whole thing, right, and full of vision. It's beautiful. It's going to be lovely. And I think I can balance it. And I think it can be quite nice and harmonious. And if I balance through all these planets, I can bring this idea, this kind of teaching out. And then I might look at Mercury. Mercury, because it's a teaching course, Mercury becomes one of the biggest influence, Mercury and Jupiter, because it's a teaching course. Those are the two main. I need them backing me here. And so I need to talk to Mercury, and Mercury's going to be like, well, can you do it? Can you do the writing? Can you do the talking? Can you communicate your ideas? Are you capable of sort of telling a story? Are you coordinated enough to bring this course into your life, into your calendar? And so I'll go, yeah, Mercury, I can handle all this. I think I got it, Mercury. And I'll go, okay, go ahead. Sort of thing. Something like Saturn, he might come along and say, well, are you really committed to teaching this? Can you commit to a 10-day course? And I kind of went, well, I got some travel coming up at the end, and it's gonna juggle it. And so hopefully I'm trying to get all my stuff in the middle of the week, teachings, and so that way I can travel sort of on the weekends and make my bigger moves. So like, yeah, I think I can commit to this. And then he went, oh, well, what about that idea of the 27 nakshatras? That's 27 weeks. And I went, help me, Saturn, please, Babaji. So that's kind of how you look through it. And I think I've
And you
got,
also could
I think I've
Rahu.
got, well, Rahu and Ketu, that's like, well, Rahu's always there, especially when you're a teacher, and especially when people are looking up at you as a guru. You always have to try to be aware of your Rahu, and hopefully, I don't know what to do about Rahu, because, well, Rahu is the one, like, I think I'm pretty wise, right? I don't know if I don't know. Maybe I'm just sending all of you guys down on a dark road, and maybe I don't know anything. Maybe I'm just really confused. And so Rahu's really hard to deal with. And as gurus, I think as teachers, and I think most of you are teachers or are young yet and will be teachers. And so we have to try to be very, very humble with ourselves at the end of the day, because there are things we don't know and things we can't account for. And we have shadows inside of ourselves. And we've made, Rahu especially has a lot to do with like past life karmas that I've made that are going to kind of come up, and karmas that I'm going to make for my future as well. And so there are, anytime we're giving teachings and anytime we're doing healing, well, this is all very dangerous karmically, because, well, if we make someone worse, we're going to have to pay for that karmically. Even making someone better puts us into a karmic cycle. And so we might like the karmas we get from it, but there's still going to be karmas. And so there's always going to be these karmas that I'm making some karmas with you guys together. We're making a stew together. We're being chefs together. So I appreciate that, but there's some kind of karmas being made here. That's not Rahu. Go ahead.
And I think is like with Rahu, the question to ask maybe, and let me know if it works or not, but is this good food to be feeding my karmic path? Because Rahu's trying to consume all the time. So when Rahu, you ask, like, is this for the greater good of karma, or is this something that's going to poison my karmic path? Is that kind of?
Well, there's a little bit, I guess, from my perspective, like from my teacher's perspective, I see students, and I get students who are, all they want is they just want it, like, it's like the person, they went to 10 astrologers this month. That's just that Rahu, they just want to consume, and they're not going to get anything from it. There's going to be no nutrients sort of thing that'll come from that. And that's even hard for you guys to predict, right? Because you saw what I did online and we talked a little bit, and I think I did readings, and some of us are met. I think Andriana I've only met in person, and so she had a little bit more to go by to come, but it's like you don't even really know if you're kind of taking a chance. And that's what Rahu has a lot to do with, those little chances. Am I even gonna get anything from this course with this guy, or is it just gonna be something that I did? And I talked to this in the other class. Just gonna be something I just sit and listen to blah, blah, blah for 2 hours once a week and then go on to something else. Right? So that's that sort of Rahu just consuming but not getting anything from it. And I really try to, everything I do, I try to avoid those kind of students actually, because, well, they're no fun for me either. Right? They might deposit their money or whatever, they might pay for the course, but they're not a lot of fun. And so people who have some sort of passion for this sort of field or this work, and they're going to think about it, and if you've got some of this stuff in you already, I'm pretty sure that I'm capable of at least a couple new things in there, like, oh, I didn't think about it that way before. So hopefully I can offer some of that, right? Hopefully you can get something from that. But that's that Rahu is that, and Ketu, they're that really unpredictable nature of things. You don't really know, right? It's like, I hope to God I can give you guys good direction and that you can get some nutrients from this, but there's going to be people as well who can get nutrients, and some people are just going to find poison in this, right? Like someone who's very orthodox, this is just like devil talk, like awful. Go away, man. So that's kind of that Rahu, and Ketu, you could say, on another perspective, I sometimes talk about the Rahu and Ketu being they are the most primordial energies in the whole chart, in a way. And so thy will be done, right? Like you just surrender to the Ketu. Rahu and Ketu are one energy. And so on the spiritual side, it's that surrender. You're trying to just surrender to even that Rahu energy. It's going to get you outside of the box. He's going to take you beyond yourself. He's going to get you in over your head, and all you can do is just surrender to that in a way. Because the karma, how we make karma is by trying to hold on to things. So the more we can just let go of even our own Rahu, the less effect he has on us. So,
Mike, can I ask you something
please.
about how I work with Rahu and Ketu? I don't know if of course, I come to courses, especially with you, because you know that I love to question everything, including all the readings I do and all the teachings I do, like they change weekly. But the way I explain Rahu and Ketu when I'm teaching philosophy, especially from the tantric perspective, how I started to associate Rahu, like you just said, Rahu and Ketu are one energy. So from the Kashmir Shaivism perspective, I see Rahu as that Icha Shakti, like that spark of separation from from Paramashiva into double parts. So that Ketu energy coming from lower part, Rahu coming from an upper part. And I started shifting my perspective into all the negative readings that you do in books and everything with Rahu. But in reality, Rahu and Ketu are like that spark. Like you said, it takes you out of, it's very difficult to explain in words. So how I would work with Rahu and Ketu, I actually use that Icha Shakti energy, like for example, to start a course or something like that. And even if my Saturn is like you, like I'm in movement, I don't know if I can do 20 classes or whatever, but that Icha Shakti, that primordial will to do something works for me, but it keeps me also in the lesson of being humble and not attached to the fruits of my own actions in the courses, like you say. So that is also a lesson like we need to learn, because the less attached I am to the outcome I plan to have with the lessons and how I want to organize them, the more I see if I let Rahu work through me in the classes. And it's that unpredictable energy, because many things come out of my mouth that I didn't write. And then those are the things that help more the students, which is so amazing. So I started to have this love relationship, maybe because I'm in my Rahu, Rahu in Ashwini return, but yeah, so that's the way I see it.
Yeah, and it's very much, it is very much, we treat them as two energies because they seem so different. Because Rahu's he's got all your attention in front of you. And it's this high vibration, this high intensity sort of thing. And it's really like, that's when, like she said, when that spark, when something actually happens, it's that Rahu, everything that, there's different perspectives, right? And I think I've talked about the difference between karma and kriya, but it's like, Rahu is making karma. If you have no karma, you have no physical existence. You have nothing, actually. And so as much as we like go karma, you have to try to, I don't know, get rid of karma and not make karma and stay away from karma. On another perspective, there's without karma, there is nothing. Now, if you want a orthodox, you can say, and fully 100% spiritual life, then yeah, you are trying to get away from that karma more and more and more, and you get that freedom, and you just go and live on top of the mountain, free and by yourself, and don't do anything. Right? But if you want kind of the tantra, if you want that freedom and the bhog, you can say that experience in material life, then you're like me, or well, I'm not a great example because I do go and hide in the jungle by myself a lot, but you come out in the world and you teach, right? And so that teaching is kind of like, it's the karma. I'm making karma with students. I'm down here in the mud and the karma and kind of working with areas where karma can very easily get made. At the same time, and this is where I talked about the kriya, if I'm remain completely unattached down here in this karmic world, working with you guys, then there's none of that stickiness of the karma. It's just this free, this spontaneous thing that's just kind of coming up and being shared and being let go of. Right? And I'm moving on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. It's just letting go all the time as much as I can. Yeah.
Correct me if but my understanding is even if you go out to the mountains and go out live alone, like avoiding karma is creating karma at the same time, right? So there's no like getting away from it, because when you get away from it, that creates itself its own, right?
That's very much true. There's a sense, I think, though, in when you compare tantra to orthodoxy, where orthodoxy they just go off and just leave it all. Whereas the tantric kind of, he renounces, geez, I have the perfect phrase in my head twice and it's slipping away. But the tantric is kind of coming back and working with the karma, you could say. They're not avoiding it. It's like, they sacrifice the freedom. That's what I wanted to say. The tantric at the end, they become free, but they sacrifice that freedom. And then they come back and they do something with it, right? Whereas the Orthodox, they get the freedom and they just kind of stay off there and try to hang on to their freedom. And then the tantrics, we kind of laugh at them for this a little bit, right? Like you said, like, well, now you're not free. Now you're bound to your ashram life. And so you want to come back, and you want to, if you're really free, then you can come back and have a life in this world as well and do something with it. And so we want to kind of, the tantrics, we want to be able to kind of express our freedom in this world, in a sense. And so then that becomes the path, as you become free and then you sacrifice your freedom. And I tell my students and anyone who will listen to me that well, oftentimes, in order to sacrifice your freedom, that's the ultimate sacrifice in a lot of ways. And so you want something that's really, really important to sacrifice your freedom for. The most important and highest thing you can possibly find. And then I say, well, that's usually going to be beyond your life. Here, it's going to be that crazy impossibility sort of thing. That's really, really big. And then sacrifice all your freedom for that. On the other hand, what happens to a lot of people is they sacrifice their freedom before they even know they're free, right? So by the time they get to the end of high school, for example, they're married, they have a bunch of kids, and they have this direction and all these responsibilities, and their freedom has already been sacrificed, and they didn't even realize that they had. Right? It's like they didn't know they were free. It's tantra. We say, well, you're free. Everybody's free. So then we don't know it. And they sacrifice it, and then it's gone. And it's like, well, I'm sorry. Now you have these responsibilities, and well, if you try to sacrifice and run away from your responsibilities, that's sort of those negative karmas that keep chasing you, right? It's like, oh, well, I had a wife and kid at age 16, and I didn't, but right, and so by the time I'm 25, I didn't really realize what I was doing, and so I just left all of that to go be a spiritual person. Well, that's not going to work, because you're going to be sitting there in the ashram and you're going to be chased. You're going to be haunted by ghosts, quite literally, right? So that's not going to work very good. And so a lot of times the path to that freedom is we have to deal with the karmic responsibilities, or you're just not going to be able to be free. And so, well, we don't teach kids this, and they don't realize that they're free, and they don't realize the incredible gift from God that freedom is. And so many people just throw it away on nothing. They just throw their freedom off and don't even give it any, right? Drug addictions, for example, right? They just chuck their freedom for this little high. And everything, all kinds of things. And we all do it. Even I do it, right? We all kind of give up our freedom for these little things that don't matter very much a lot of time. And so we should be aware that we are free, and your freedom means something. And wow, don't just sacrifice it to anything. And be serious. Like, know be aware of what you're sacrificing your freedom to. Now, I wanted to go over some stuff, and it's on one hand, like these are categories. We see these categories in Kashmiri shares, and on one hand, these kind of categories, I find them as soon as I put anything in a category for you guys, just throw that category away. But we have categories, and some people like them because this is, I know people, they give whole courses on these kind of things of Kashmiri Shaivism, just teaching the language basically. And so you should know a bit of the language from this. And so these are the upayas. They're means to spiritual enlightenment. But in Vedic astrology, we call all these remedies that we give as well. These are all upayas. These are all means to something, you could say. Upaya is a means to something, a way to get something. And so in Kashmiri Shaivism, they broke up like 4 different ways of spiritual enlightenment. And so I used these are a lot of notes from Mark's classes that I've put into here. So he talked about Anava Upaya, and this is this individual means. And this is basically like most of the yoga we do is all this individual means. This is like, in a sense, I could say this sort of general knowledge, right? Like, you want a better life, exercise, do meditation, eat better. These are all these individual means in a sense. It gets a little bit deeper than that, but I tend to think once we go deeper, then we get into the Shaktapaya. And now there's some fancy things they say about concentration on the void and just trying to draw the consciousness and awareness deeper. And really what Shaktapaya is these are the means that it's like, okay, well, exercise and do meditation and eat healthy and do all of that stuff. But now Shaktapaya is becoming a little bit more specific. So it's like, here, do this. Well, you'll know for yourself, right? But do this specific exercise for yourself. Right? Do this specific thing for your own body type. Right? So you're kind of going deeper into the practice. It's becoming, on one hand, now they talk about this as the individual means, but we are actually kind of bringing it more into the self as we do these more serious practices. I think the Shaktapaya is really, this is what a lot of the tantric practices are on, the Shaktapaya. It's that self-reflection, reflecting everything back in on the self. If we think of like the three categories of like unity versus diversity and full diversity sort of thing, then what we get is this first one. I think I've got it here. I don't think this is on what you sent, but I think I wrote it here. I'll check, make sure I did. But Anavapaya is like this, it's where we're working in this very diverse world, dualities. You're working in this world of duality for your own betterment. When you go into Shaktapaya, you're still cognizant of the duality and the division in the world, but you're working with it as if it's all one. Right? You're seeing yourself as more as one with nature. So it's not just like in the first, you might take some natural supplements you take in Anavapaya. In Shaktapaya, you might learn how to make those supplements for yourself and learn about the tree and the nature and how to do that for yourself. You're kind of going in on a deeper level of awareness and consciousness with Shaktapaya. And that whole reflection on the self becomes very, very important. Yeah, so self-reflection. And then we get this Shambhava Paya. This is Shambhu Shiva. This is, they call this the divine way. Now, I think what's really happening, like again, we make these categories, and this can be like, sometimes they say in yoga, like there's these different kinds of yoga and you should practice one of them. These are all going on at the same time. It's like all the different practices of yoga. You should be practicing them all at the same time, merging them as one in a sense. But Shambhavapaya is more this grace and the way of divine grace. And in some sense, this is the only way in Tantra that works. It's the only spiritual path that is sure is grace. I love this quote by Abhinavagupta. I follow this Lakshman Jewel Academy on Instagram, and they keep posting this quote about every 3 months. They post it in a different way. And it's Abhinavagupta or Lakshman Jewel, I think, saying, I don't know where exactly come, one of the great masters. And he says, there's Shiva's grace, boss. There's no why something happened. There's no reason why something happened. It only, things happen because of Shiva's grace. Boss, that's all. Boss is like full stop, right? And so it's like, so you're doing meditation. Say you start a meditation practice. Now, the question becomes, is your meditation a means to enlightenment, or is your meditation a product of your already natural enlightenment? And so what the Shaivites would generally say is it's your natural enlightenment. It's just that these spiritual practices and these spiritual paths, they're not getting you anywhere. They're a result of what you already have. They're like the signs and symbols we can see of one who is Shiva. Right? Shambhapaya, Shivoham. I am Shiva. I know this already. I am grace. There's nothing to be done. Well, that comes in the next. Shambhavapaya is more like, well, they know there's nothing to be done, and actually they just have to kind of like remember that they're Shiva. And they're like, oh yeah, I'm Shiva. And so they kind of fall out of it for daily life and daily work, and then they come back and they go, oh yeah, I'm Shiva. In the lower paths, we have to do a bit of work to get that realization of Shiva. We have to, anyways, you have to do some yoga, you have to do something. You're like, well, I'm not Shiva. You feel that you feel separated. And so you're like, oh, if I do this meditation, if I do all these practices, that'll help me become more like Shiva. And so you do all of this stuff and it helps you to connect to Shiva, right? And that helps from that perspective. On the Anavapaya, your meditation is getting you to enlightenment. On Jambavapaya, your meditation is just part of your lifestyle. It's part of who you are, you could say. And Anavapaya is like, this is the greatest. There's nothing at all to be done. You just always know that you are Shiva, Shivam, 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 Shivam. And you always feel that connected. You always feel that oneness with everything. You never feel that disconnection in Shivoham and Anavapaya. And so there's absolutely nothing to be done. You realize that no matter what you are doing is Shiva. It's full sort of liberation. You are one with Shiva. And now how this works is like they separate it because we often experience them in separate ways. And it's not like, oh, there's some great saint who's living in this space of Anavapaya and always just has full grace. It's like, no, it's once in a while something happens for you where you are just so fully connected, and it happens for everyone. Everyone has all of these sort of ways of connecting. And so there's times when you just know that whatever cruel thing you're doing to someone has higher meaning. And it's almost this channeled coming from grace. And I'm sorry, here's a harsh lesson for you, and I have to be the one to give it to you, but you're fully connected. And so someone looks out at that and thinks, oh God, what a jerk. But there's something higher at work, and there always is somehow, right? But there's something higher at work. And so you still recognize that even in being a jerk, that's part of Shiva's, that's no separate from Shiva. Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess yeah, what you're saying makes sense, and I've seen people choose this path and like they indulge in everything, in food and sex and drugs, and then they say, oh, I'm enlightened, I am graceful, this is all that needs to happen, yet they're kind of setting fires on everyone and even to themselves and to their body.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of approach that, I guess, kind of thing without, yeah,
Here's the thing. If you are free and truly free, then you aren't just kind of free to do whatever you want. I think freedom and spiritual freedom comes with a strong sort of like, you've got a lot of self-respect with that freedom. You've got that strong sun and that strong moon, right? So you've got that sort of, and so really in tantra you could say, okay, there's freedom, and so they're running off and they're Shiva, and they are actually, they're right, they are Shiva. It's just like everybody else, they are Shiva, but they're destroying themselves that way, and they're destroying others. They're not healers, they're not being nice, they're not bringing good things. But the thing is, it's like, if you want to be free, if you want to go out and do everything, if you want to be free to drink and have sex and eat meat and just live whatever kind of anything, do anything, what I would say is first develop self-respect, and then you are free. Then when you go out and you have some drink, it's gonna be some nice festive occasion, for example. It's gonna be a beautiful event, right? You go out and you have sex, it's going to be a beautiful, lovely thing when there's self-respect involved. You can do anything when you have self-respect, right? And your guru will kind of tell you, that's like, in a way, right? Your guru is the one who gives permission. And so the guru, once someone has self-respect, the guru then will say, okay, yeah, you go do anything you want. It doesn't matter. Just go do whatever you want, right? Because you have self-respect. The person who has no self-respect, their guru is going to be like, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that, no, don't do that, don't do anything. Just don't do anything, right? Like, you have no self-respect, really, don't do anything. A person has no right to any kind of action if they have no self-respect, right? Just sit there by yourself and learn some self-respect, man. and then go out and act in the world.
And that makes a lot of sense too, with like, let's say just using Buddhist traditions, or like just sit there and meditate till you feel and go through everything, that you gain that self-respect for yourself, and then you hit enlightenment, and then you can kind of go out and do everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's really that. Oh, we've got a couple hours. I think I'm gonna send this out right after. I didn't change it a lot from the other moon one you had, but there are a few other fresh things in here, moon mantras and so. So, wow, 2 hours goes quick, doesn't it? Yeah, so, that's what I have for moon today. We're gonna go through some of this stuff as we go through the different planets as well. I hadn't mentioned Rahu and Ketu, so I just wanted to kind of mention him here or there too. But we'll have a class. I left them to the end. I sometimes think I should have flipped this whole thing around, did Rahu and Ketu first, and then in the end we become a full human being with a sun and some truth in our life. But we'll start with truth and go to darkness, I guess. So and then you guys can figure your way back to the light. So it's been very nice chatting with you. Again, I'll usually stick around. I'll stop the recording here, but I'll stick around for a little while longer if anyone has any questions or wants to chat a bit.
Thank you.
Thank
Super
you.
interesting as always.
Yeah, thank you. Good course, good class. Appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you guys for coming out. It's wonderful to see you. So see you, I guess most of you tomorrow. So, yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mike. I'll try to be tomorrow live if I can.
Okay, wonderful.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, I have questions as always. I was